Welcome to the My Narrative podcast. I'm your host, Yafa Ares. The following is a conversation with Bugembe. Mark is the co-founder and CEO of Decidable. He's a consultant, author, international speaker, and executive advisor, helping organizations use data and AI to transform their businesses and grow. I saw your post recently on Decidable, so congrats.
Thank you very much. Exciting times, looking to change the world.
All right, so tell me what you've been up to. What's going on?
Do you want me to share a bit about myself first, as I think that adds relevant content, or do you just want me to just jump into what I've been?
Well, yeah, it would be great to hear about your journey and what you've been up to since the JustGiving days, maybe. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Let me tell you about my journey, all right? To give you a flavor of who Mike is, right? So I have always been passionate about technology, primarily the world of data, analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. It's that started from a very young age. At the age of 9 years old, I wrote my first computer game. Perhaps more inspired by the fact that, several areas of inspiration. My dad had an Apple IIe in the house, which he used to write economic models for the United Nations. And I was also a very big movie fan. I watched a movie called War Games, in which a young boy managed to hack a database and set up some nuclear weapons. Not like that's a desire of mine, but the idea of being able to hack into a database through a modem. That got me onto the computer, and I started exploring, learned how to communicate with that machine, engage with that machine, and built a computer game. And since then, I have always been fascinated about the world. But I also come from a relatively academic and philosophical family. My granddad was a psychiatrist in Uganda and was very passionate about the human brain. He had many of those around his house. I remember every time I visited my grandfather, just the fascination of all the model brains that existed in his living room were always excited me and made me curious about the human mind. So inevitably, I ended up in this space where that interplay between machine intelligence and human intelligence, or human behavior, if you like, what makes us tick, what makes us make decisions, what makes us do the things that we do today. I believe you call it, or people call it, the area of behavioral economics academically. So that interplay between behavioral economics and machine intelligence or artificial intelligence is an area that I'm extremely, extremely passionate about. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to pursue a career in that after studying electronic engineering. I'll give you a small anecdote there. I wanted to study computer science, but coming from very staunch African traditional parents, they were like, my dad was like, do a proper degree, right? Which in those days, being the early mid 90s, was either medicine, law, economics, or engineering. Architecture, I also sat in there. I can't draw. I get bored reading contracts, and I'm not a fan of blood. And so engineering was the most natural space. Also, it was the closest I could get to computing. It was the absolute right thing to do. I essentially learned the core principles of mathematics and the building blocks, if you like, of the way the electronic things that we use today work. So that ended up being an essential foundation for what I wanted to do. And fast forward, I'm now having spent 20 odd years in a career of data analytics and machine learning. So very exciting times. And also, JustGiving gave me a very, very unique opportunity to be able to use that world and combine it with the way we make decisions around giving around raising money for causes that we care about, around understanding what we are passionate about at any particular given time. So that's where I got to use more of the behavioral economics and that combination with that of machine learning. And so that's me, if you like. That's a flavor of who I am and what I'm passionate about. I'm married and I have 3 lovely, amazing boys.
That's good. That's amazing. Yeah. Hey, you have an interesting background, Mike. I think it's maybe unusual compared to, I guess, what current practitioners are following. I mean, a lot of people nowadays study probably computer science, so that's interesting. I think that I don't think I've ever met a data practitioner like you that started learning, about data and all things tech through something else other than computer science. So that's quite refreshing to hear.
Yeah, it's I do wonder that those worlds are all interconnected, right? The amount of mathematics involved in the way a computer operates, understanding, how we can interpret electricity into logical function and logical gates in order to get things done. They're all, those are worlds that are fully joined up together, and I think it's difficult to separate them. Understanding the building blocks of anything is really, really useful, but it can get dangerously theoretical. And there's a requirement, I believe, in any of those things to become practitioners, so that we can actually use those 300-year-old equations to make a difference.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I remember when we first connected a couple of years now, something that caught my attention. Again, it's when you used to work, I think, at JustGiving, and I've read somewhere, I think it was one of your quotes, or maybe something they have described on the website, that you use the power of data and algorithms to increase generosity. I love that. I love that so much, because obviously we all know about the opportunities, but also the risks presented by algorithms, and sometimes you can drive these forces towards greater good or the opposite, right? But in your case, it was all legal, ethical, and like you said, you increased the power of generosity. So I would love to hear more about what you have accomplished at JustGiving, because I think it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to share. It was definitely one of the big highlights of my life and my career. Also, interestingly, it wasn't a decision that I took lightly. I pondered it for quite a while, because I'd been very much in the commercial sector before that. This really gave me an opportunity to apply an intentional moral stance, if you like, or moral lens, I should say, on what we're doing with data and machine learning. But let me ask you a question. If you found that with the power of machine learning, you could influence and inspire people to take action, to do something, to raise money, to give money, how ethical is that?
Well, I would say, on the one hand, obviously the goal is to, like you say, to increase generosity. So one could argue it's good because you're supporting communities, you're supporting people around you. That has benefits not just for whoever's receiving this support, but also for yourself. That is something good about it. But on the other hand, one could say, well, how ethical it is, because at the end you're driving one's company's organizational, profit. And so there's a fine line between the two, how we can nudge people to achieve like positive actions for themselves and others around them. But obviously, again, it's the question around the bottom line. Ultimately, let's just be candidly here. So yeah, the balance between the two, I think.
Or let's add a third piece to that, so that we can triangulate the question. You talked about, let's consider the fact that are we removing people's choice in how much they give, in what they raise, and so forth, by influencing them? So if somebody was perhaps going to give £10, but you knew what to do, or the machine knew what to do to make that £10 20. There is the argument, like you said, that the causes deserve that money because there are lots of causes out there that need that. There is an argument for the company itself in that it increases its bottom line as a result of that. There is also that counter argument to say, well, have we manipulated that person to give the money? So it's a difficult question to answer, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. It's difficult for even I imagine yourself as a technologist, as you. Well, one cannot understand fully 100% how algorithms work, and that's another debate. But you kind of understand the basic mechanics around it. And I think it's tricky. But we are social animal, and at the end, you know, we all saying, yeah, but we rational have made that decision because XYZ. But at the end, it all comes down to one thing: it's emotion. So yes, I agree. The technology can sometimes dangerously push people and nudge people to make certain decisions. In that case, yeah, giving away more money than they plan to. But at the end, we all the time we're making decisions based on emotions, whether we like it or not. This is happening 24/7.
Let's talk about that, Yafa, and see how much we're on that same page. You ever heard of the concept of a Norman door?
No, tell me about it. No.
So picture yourself at university in a lecture theatre, right? And you've got the professor at the front. The entrance to the lecture theatre is at the front where the professor is, and everybody sits sort of opposite the professor listening to them, right? And you decide you something better you'd rather do, and decide to walk down the stairs and try and exit as subtly as possible. Right? You get to the door, and the door has a handle on it, right? And you start pulling the door, okay? And you're pulling and pulling and pulling, and you pull to the extent that you attract the attention of the lecturer and everybody else in the class. When actually the only way the door was going to open was if you pushed the door, right? Okay, so that happens often. You see that where people are pulling doors which should be pushed and so forth, And that decision was not. I'd wonder, was that decision an emotional decision to pull the door rather than to push, or was it a function of the design that influenced your processing and your decision on how to open the door? So if, for example, instead of a handle, it had a panel, right? Then you would only know that you have to push the door. Because it's a handle, perhaps your brain decided that you should be pulling. So I don't know how much of an emotional decision that is, actually. It's the choice architecture or the design, the architecture of that is the one that's influenced your decision. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that example. It's an interesting one. It's I think there's a lot of truth because again, when we talk about design, you're talking about ultimately it's an immersive experience, and that impacts how you react, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think yes, I like the concept. There's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I mean But then it's how do you react based on the first reaction? So you're trying to pull the door, you pull it, and I think it's how do you decide then to react? Do you want to stop, think, and then act, or do you still continue like a maniac?
And you call that person a maniac. We do this often, The brain has told us that it has a handle, and a handle you pull, right? And so you continue because that's the default processing. You pull a handle, and it's only after perhaps some embarrassment or even just physical movement that you realize, oh, shucks, the door actually opens the other way, and live in a world now, if I can connect to the world of data analytics and machine learning, that we have so much information about how we respond to certain cues, how we respond to certain environments, that the machine now, with all the information available, actually is in a really good position to manipulate our decisions. It's in a really good position to influence what we feel, what we do, and how we also, respond to certain things. So it's very fascinating times and really, really interesting, but also a little scary when you realize that that is the power that resides in that machine right
now. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's I mean, I'm pro tech and I'm very optimistic about the future, but at the same time, I feel like I have this yin and yang within me, and just learning so much as well about the risks and just trying to apply what we call like metacognition, almost being aware and be aware of that you're thinking right now, or being aware of your own emotions at that moment, and thinking about thinking almost, and kind of looking myself sometimes from a distance and smiling and say, oh, I clicked on that, or I did that, or because of this and that. I'm not saying I'm completely aware of how machines influence me, because I don't think one can, but I think it's good to apply these concepts of, again, to just metacognition and understanding better how things work, and even starting from a product design, perspective, understanding all these invisible incentives and triggers and reward system and variable systems, and closely linked to actually neuroscience, and understanding how, sometimes some products are built just like Las Vegas machine slots, and understanding the dopamine system and the variable rewards and all that stuff. It's quite valuable, I think.
Yeah. And dopamine, it's really, really interesting. I heard such a fascinating story one time of some medication that was prescribed to some patients. I can't remember what the condition was for, but it was a certain type of medication that when people who took that medication suddenly became compulsive gamblers. I really wish I could remember what that medication was, but it was absolutely fascinating, because what it did is it really stimulated this dopamine thing. And we as humans, we tend to crave finding patterns in things, right? And we overestimate our ability to find patterns. Or, when we forget that actually the brain does everything it can to make shortcuts of things. So, instead of finding real patterns, it relies on historical heuristics. Yeah. Which is why you get a picture of what a bad guy looks like. Any person who has a resemblance to a bad guy, your brain immediately says bad guy, right? And then you have to work to change that. This is some of the problems that we have with racial profiling today. It's the problems that we have with, stereotypes and things like that, because actually the brain has been designed to conserve energy, and therefore will rely on this automatic system of judgment, which causes a whole heap of problems in a world that is so driven by, or so surrounded by, a massive degree of information. So, and this is why we're living in a space where elections can be decided by a free tool online, a free social media tool online. And people who've worked out, therefore, how to manipulate that are also, we now have the concept of fake news, because all of these things have an impact. So both an interesting, but also a very, very scary time.
Yes, I agree. And so I guess, based on, the great examples you provided, and I guess you feel good about the work obviously you have done at JustGiving. You don't feel like you have manipulated people, right?
I don't feel like we have. I think actually we took a very, very intentional stance on that. We run an algorithm on one occasion that found quite clearly that we could take a huge amount of donations from certain individuals. Picture this as a scenario where you're sat in front of the television at 9 o'clock, if you are of that type of person. And at 9 o'clock, there are specific types of shows that are being presented, and you receive a donation request on your phone on a Friday or Thursday night, and you're in front of the TV, perhaps having a drink, and you receive a donation request on your phone. And if the donation request has a pre-filled amount in there that at a glance may look quite palatable, you're more likely to just agree with it. Whereas if you have time on your hands, you're not being distracted by TV or perhaps a drink, or it's 9 o'clock and your tired levels or levels of, cognition are much higher. You might go in there and adjust that amount. And so therefore you could get significantly more donations if that set of scenarios was available. So we had to decide not to use that algorithm because, it wasn't really giving the person the best chance to make that decision. If anything, that I would say is close to manipulation. So we didn't do that, So I think we were very intentional at JustGiving. I thoroughly enjoyed my time, and what a great opportunity to use the world of machine learning, decision making, human behaviors to for what I believe a worthy cause, which is to help people connect to causes that they care about and help people raise money for the things that they are really passionate about. So exciting times. But I've moved on from there since.
Yeah. Decidable and Lens and what we want to talk about. I mean, I saw your post, like I said earlier in the discussion. It looks exciting.
I'm excited about it, and it's a continuation of that whole journey where we're saying that the world of data and analytics does have its place. We need it, particularly if you're in a business. I mean, we do it naturally today. We make our decisions every time as human beings by taking in millions and millions of data points and then making decisions on the back of that. Companies do the same. And so, however, in a company context, lots of the information that we get is still presented in a rather complex way, right? It's think of all the graphs that our respective governments have shown us around Corona and its impact. And also think about the manipulation of perspective that comes from those graphs by getting things slightly wrong. So like missing a y-axis, for example, may make a graph look like the things are beginning to decrease, whereas if y-axis in, it'll show that actually there's a dramatic increase taking place and it's not slowing down. There's many cases of that that are available. So one of the ways we've tried to solve that today as people is we try to increase the data literacy of the general population. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I started to do when I got out of JustGiving was how could we get more people to see and understand what data is saying. So created Lens.AI to almost give people a very different lens on the world of artificial intelligence by saying it's not just for people who studied mathematics, further maths, or computer science or engineering, that actually it's a new language that everybody needs to understand. The same way that you can't get a job today without being able to work on the internet. If you don't know how to do that, you don't know how to operate a spreadsheet, for example, it's very difficult for you to even get some employment. So data becomes one of those things that I think everybody should explore and begin to understand. After all, it makes you far more useful in your organization. Imagine the ability to combine your superpower, yours is marketing, for example, with data, then you become really, really valuable, right? And so that's what Lens was. But we took it a step further with Decidable. We said, okay, you have the choice of increasing everybody's data literacy, or actually we could use the machines to, instead of speaking in such a complex language of graphs and tables, why don't the machines just provide a narrative? Story is something that has been with us from the beginning of time. Before we were typing, before we were writing, we worked with stories. Our parents have told us stories ever since we were children. And those stories have helped us understand concepts, understand different ways of life, understand perspective. And they've also helped us with our decisions. All of those stories. There are some stories in certain people of perhaps a very strong religious persuasion that will influence their behavior. There's some people of a very liberal persuasion, the stories that they're told that will influence their behavior. And therefore, data has a story to tell. And what we're doing at Decidable is we have the ambition to tell all of the world's data stories so that it's accessible to everybody.
Nice. And I have a question, Mike. So I haven't seen or used the product yet. So Sorry if I'm bashing it without even, having a chance to test it. But is it? Yeah, I mean, when I look at, I'm very excited about the future of AI, and actually, I think automation, at least for people that creating, will actually help us, have more free time to do more human things, and that's why I'm really hopeful and excited about the future of automation and things like that. But in the case of Decidable, don't you think that it can diminish the human power if the AI or the tools already creates or write down that story versus presenting the data in a compelling way? So, for instance, I've used Tableau before. I love Tableau. It's a pretty cool tool. I think again, yeah, it just brings and give a voice to your data in a nice visualized way. And then me, human being with the power of storytelling and the power of analysis, I can build a story around that. So don't you think it will sort of diminish our human skills or capabilities if even the machine will start to actually write down that story for us?
It's a great question, Rafa. I think one of the things we have to understand is that we are living in an increasingly machine and data-driven world right now. It's unavoidable, okay? And it's really, really almost impossible, I think, to get off the grid, if you like. It's difficult to do that. So taking a step and saying, let's look at the current reality, and be honest about the reality of the world that we're in. With more machines and more data, what we should be doing is trying to understand, how do we work together, right? How do we combine human intelligence with machine intelligence? Because actually the machine can do a lot of mundane stuff for us. And I'll give you a really great story. I met Gary Kasparov in 19, sorry. I met Gary Kasparov in 2018. And over dinner we started to talk. Gary Kasparov, you know who he is, right? He's
the guy, yeah, who played against the IBM machine.
Yes.
Like that, yeah.
Against Deep Blue, and he lost.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this machine plus human combination, right? And we were exploring an idea that he's also explored. If he was working alongside a machine, could he have beaten Deep Blue, right? And there has been a lot of experiments that have proven actually that the combination of machine plus human is the most superior form of intelligence. And in the example, there was a chess tournament in 2005 where you had amateurs, you had grandmasters, you had computers. So Hydra, the new version of Deep Blue, was also part of that chess tournament. And you could use any combination or permutation of those, right? So you could be man plus machine, you could be a grandmaster in computer, you could be amateur and grandmaster, any of those. And the winning combination was two amateurs working with a machine, and they won easily, by the way, right? But what they had was they had the knowledge of of how to combine, human strategy and machine operations, human, intuition and machine calculation, So they had that thing of those things that are inherently human and we are really, really good at, and the things that the machine is really, really good at. Machine can calculate really, really fast. We can create, right? Why not be the best we can possibly be at the things that we're great at, and hand over to the machine the things that perhaps can save us time so that we can be more human rather than less human, right? Take some of those tasks off. This is one of the reasons why we have new transportation systems, because it helps us get to places quicker than if we were just walking, and we then arrive at that place at the best we can possibly be, rather than exhausted having run 4 miles to go and visit a friend, and those sort of things. So I'm more in favor, a long-winded way to answer your question, in that I think if we can continue to understand how to give the machine tasks that allow us to become more human, it's the right thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think, I agree. It's a partnership with the machines, right? But with your example, something came up, in my mind, and I'm not sure if that happened. If we had an AlphaGo versus AlphaGo and human, I would be very curious. Have we had already that?
I don't think we have, and that would
I
be
would love to see one. That would be exciting.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, and I bet you the human plus AlphaGo will win.
Oh, let's see. Because, well, I don't know. Because, like you probably watched the documentary, and that gave me goosebumps. I was like, oh, this is exciting, and it almost felt like the AlphaGo had human spirit, like I dare to say. With this almost, especially I remember, I think it was throughout the game or right at the beginning, that really odd move that actually made a huge crowd at the end, and it almost feels like human intuition, and who knows? And again, it's the power of computing, right? And how many? I'm not a data scientist, but I just saw online and all these clusters and tree clusters of algorithms and numbers and half further down the line, AlphaGo went already to kind of seeing the future almost, right? It's quite scary. It's quite spooky.
But remember also that was it 1 out of 5 games Lee Sedol won, right? Yeah. And in that game that he won, he did a move that nobody could understand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Him, it was the most natural thing to do. It's really interesting because if he was replaced by a computer, that's a great example. That move that he did was the most natural thing to do. But if you were calculating, that may not have been the right thing to do. You know what I'm saying? And that's where it can prompt calculations, right? And knowing when to do that. And I remember that one game he won. It was so great in that documentary. You saw how everybody was like, "What?" Yeah, like when he made that move, it was just. I think they even called it the God move, right? Really, really. Is fascinating. But I think also, as we explore this topic, probably we're trying to understand how do machines learn, and how do you get a machine to that particular stage? And generally, machines learn very similarly to the way that we do, right? But therefore, it has limitations. So if a machine learns, we learn from experience, right? Machine learns from data, and data we can like what's the example? We use that as a way of saying it's coded experiences, right? Experiences that are put in a database. So therefore, the machine is limited by the experiences that are put in the database, and we aren't, right? Okay, so therefore, you can't ignore the human spirit. You can't ignore the human condition. You can't ignore any of those things because we take in so many data points that we can't even code just yet. There's things that we feel, and that's us taking in a data point. We can't articulate how, but we're just like, no, that doesn't feel right. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think we're a long way away from how to that doesn't feel right and put it in a database so a computer could learn.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's quite refreshing to hear that from, I guess, a tech guy. I'm very much like team human, and when I say that, I'm not against tech. Actually, quite the contrary. But again, I think it's not a human versus machine or machine versus human. I think it's a partnership for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess, well, you've already highlighted, I guess, the great opportunities and through like the new product that you just launched, and trying to arm humans with greater insights to again create greater impact in the organization. So that's awesome. But I think again, like anything, with opportunities come risk and challenges. And there's one thing I think we should be, aware and very thoughtful about is. So I think you've mentioned two things: the limitation of data, right, and versus us, and the fact that we absorb so many things and things that goes, beyond our universe, and things that we don't even know, it's subconscious things and things like that. So I think as humans, we have a responsibility to almost learn to be a human in a digital age, or in the age of machines. So that means being able to work with those machines, but also always apply good judgment and critical thinking. And I will give you dumb examples, but I think that kind of makes the point. It's like sometimes, you use Google Maps and you're like, meh, no, that's not a correct route. Whether you're walking or sometimes driving, and we saw that sometimes people end up, who knows, in the middle of nowhere, almost actually die because they follow blindly the machine, right? So again, I haven't used your product, but I think that could maybe be part of the, not training, or I don't know, it could come up with the guidelines that don't forget you are a human, and use it wisely, use the stories or data wisely, but always apply common sense, good judgment, and critical thinking, because again, we all know the power of data algorithms are limitless. Let's just say it. And I think it's important to not lose our human compass.
I agree, but I don't know. When you said the power of algorithms are limitless, I stopped for a second there. I stopped for a second there, and I don't know my feeling about that. It's one I have to explore internally. Are they limitless? Yeah, but I'm not sure.
I think so.
Really?
I mean, numbers are infinite, and so for me, computing, they have their own, I guess, unlimited trajectory. So you have to put that in mind. It's a different rail track versus human, but I think they have their own infinite game. If that makes sense.
Okay. All right. There's a book actually I started reading. I think it's another one of the Simon Sinek books where it's called The Infinite Game. Only because you said I haven't actually got into it properly, so couldn't share any more on that. Sorry, I got distracted there. Apologies. Is it infinite? I don't know yet. I'm not sure. Let me sit on that for a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talking about books, well, again, I think we first connected again a couple of years ago because I kind of stalked you. Like, yeah, I'm kind of weirdo here, but yeah, I've read your book. Hey, great one, super easy to read, and that's a compliment because I love tech books that just don't talk nonsense. I mean, it's just pretty straightforward, and you don't use crazy jargons and business buzzwords and stuff like that. So well done to you, and I recommend anyone to read the book. I'll share that in the show notes for sure. But tell me, do you plan to release a new book? Again, super linked to what you're doing right now, Decidables, and the interplay between machine intelligence and humans. So do you plan to release a new book, or?
I do actually. It's far from the time to do it. I have a working title. It's called Becoming Bionic, and it's really about this next evolution of us human beings, where how we join forces with the machine to continue and ensure the thriving of the human race. That's what I'm thinking about, and we've already talked a lot about some of those topics about how we can combine, the aspects of human that are really, really powerful with the aspects of the machine that are, essentially powerful as well. So
Okay.
Yeah, that's the working title, the working theme. Beyond that, I haven't gone much further, actually. Yafa, that's what happens when you're a startup founder. You have to prioritize on getting your product out there and getting it to grow.
No, it makes sense. That will be another episode once you release that one. But so let's just quickly talk about your first book and how it still resonates today. And so obviously I think if I remember correctly, your first book was all about educating senior execs, or anyone who wants to do something with data and remain competitive into this market, obviously. And in your view, like, what are the things that maybe the audience here listening or any organizations that really wish to embark on that journey should right now, like, stop, tweak, continue, and start when it comes to the AI or data journey?
Yeah, I think the central theme of that book was to try and get people to move away. That success from data is a technical challenge, and to move away from that perspective to understand that success from data is a human challenge, right? And the organizations that get it right have a very different setup of people, a very different setup of understanding, a very different setup of perspectives, and they get real value from the data. So let's talk about the fangs, if you like: Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Spotify. Their perspective on data is really, really, really different. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. Okay, the book goes down into detail to try and say that data has only one single function or one single purpose, and that is for human decision making, right? Now, there's many things that data can do with that. It can either support, help give you knowledge to understand how to make the most effective decision, or it could automate the decision. And let's talk about a few examples to try and understand what I mean there. Let's look at the Amazon recommendation engine. Okay, you've bought some products, it suggests other products to you. Now, the decision that recommendation engine is supporting is, if we didn't have that, the people within Amazon would have to work out and decide what other products should we serve this individual so that we can maximize the basket size. Yeah, but that decision now is fully automated. Let's go to another example that everybody's aware about. I type a search query into Google and I get results. Without the algorithm, we have to make the decision of, okay, what links should we provide to this individual that closely match what we think they're looking for? Whereas that's another decision that's been automated. So that's where the AI sits. Now let's bring it down to what a lot of organizations are still doing today, which is, I need some insights from my data, right? So I'm working in marketing, for example, and my main role is to understand the efficacy, or the efficiency rather, of our marketing spend, and see if it's ROI positive, see if there are any channels that I need to invest in, are there any opportunities, are there any further issues that I need to address, right? So your analyst would provide you insights, or your dashboard, or your tool, your data will give you the insights to support that decision, right? So if data is all about decision making, the one thing that I've seen only one organization do is say, okay, let's understand what all our key decisions are, right? Very few organizations do that, because actually then you start seeing that you're using data a little haphazardly, right? Whereas if you know the decisions that you've got to make, then you almost ask yourself a different question. You ask yourself, what do I need to know to make that decision? And that's where data comes in. Or what do I need to automate to make that decision? That's where data comes in. Do you get what I'm saying, Yafa? And I think we overcomplicate it, and the book really just tries to say, look, in order for you to crack the data code and get value from it, understand that firstly it's a people thing. Next thing, understand that it's all about decisions, right? And take to try and understand the decisions within your organization. The moment you do that, all your data and analytics use cases will literally drop out. It even removes it from understanding data and analytics as a tech requirement. I'll give you a really simple. There's a CEO of a school in Wales. Now this is a school built specifically for children that have been excluded from the education system. Right? They've been expelled so many times or suspended that no other school will take them anymore. Right? Now the consequences are huge. These children therefore have a significantly higher propensity to suffer from mental illness when they're adults, very high propensity to end up in the prison system, very high propensity to end up with, committing suicide, as an example. So how can AI help in that particular process? Well, look at this. Imagine if a teacher knew that Charlie was going to come into school the next day and throw the chair at another student, right?
Yeah.
If you were aware of that as a teacher,
you remove all the chairs in the classroom.
you just did something there. You made a decision to try and address the likelihood of this thing occurring or not, right?
Yeah.
So if teachers were armed with that data, then their decision-making process will be different, reducing the chances of Charlie being exposed to school, and therefore ending up with a very different prospect for their life based on the statistics.
Yeah.
And so data can play a really big role in that. Or data can play a role in understanding why is Charlie coming in and throwing the chair the next day. And for a lot of these children, it's because of issues at home. Something as significant as your parents divorcing has an impact on the child and their corresponding behavior. So a parent being arrested has a very different impact and outlook on the way that child will correspondingly behave, right? So having all of that data, when your parents argue the night before, your behavior at school is different, particularly if you witness it, so all of those things, data can play a really big role in influencing our decision or the teacher's decision on what to do or how to behave. Even the parent's decision on how to speak to Charlie in the morning before he goes to school.
Yeah.
So just boiling it down to understanding that it's all about decision making, then it opens up the door to so many use cases for data and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and people, and obviously people are key because they will be the end users, the users, you name it, major stakeholders in the whole thing. But so you I know you've mentioned you have 3 kids and they're really cute and beautiful. So what do you think? Well, I think it's a nice segue. It's quite connected because you've mentioned it's about people, decision making, and obviously with the rapid increase of automation and machines and data in the society. I don't know what are your views on that, but it looks like we will have on the one hand the builders, the ones that can actually code machine learning and much more. And then you will have the creators, and I mean, many professions and jobs are creative, like, you can be a fireman, firefighter, teacher, whatever. The ones that actually use the data and use the machines and work with it. And in between, what we used to have, like, people doing certain jobs will be completely removed, it looks like. Yet. I don't know what are your thoughts on that. And so and the future generations, the people of tomorrow entering the marketplace, and even us currently, what will be your message to them? What will be the message to your kids, for instance, when you look at that? And maybe you disagree with that vision. I don't know. That's quite extreme what I just shared, but you probably get the idea of what I'm trying to say, right?
I do get the idea. And look, the whole job spectrum is going to change. It changed when the internet came, created new jobs. The job of webmaster. Who would have predicted there was a job that was going to exist or even disappear? By the way, right? Since then, and technology is changing so rapidly that to try and predict what the roles and things are, it's going to be difficult. But we can look at specific trajectories, and like you said, there are the builders, but the machines are increasingly taking a lot of those tasks that can be automated, right? A lot of those decision-making tasks that can be automated. So we have to be aware of that, and I think we should be cognizant of that, and that the machine's going to do that. So do you want to, in those categories that you mentioned, be one of the builders, the coders, the people who write the algorithms, and bearing in mind that I actually think the algorithms will write themselves very soon, right? So I don't even know if that profession will continue to exist.
Yeah, gotta be creative. You'll have a creative job at least, but yeah.
So it's about, I think it's all about keeping your finger, as a parent, keeping your finger on the pulse of what's there, and building the qualities that are innately human. I do believe we exist to create, and in whatever sphere, but we all exist to create, and this is my belief anyway. So therefore, we should be really building that muscle, and it's understanding which sphere to build that in. People, when journalists create stories, film directors create stories there as well. Chefs are creators. Everyone, that ability to create, I think, is something that we can't remove, and we should really try and hone in. So I see my job as a parent really as somebody who takes them to as many watering holes as possible, seeing which ones they actually begin to drink from, and then developing that from there. Because the idea of taking your child to a watering hole and then they drink and then they're like, yes, I found their passion, I found their thing. I'm not a believer that that's enough. I think passion's developed, right? Therefore, there is a lot of grunt work that has to go into that for it to really become a true thing that you can execute on in the future.
I agree. It's I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Play it. You're good at that.
I like to push you. So, okay, let's just say not everyone has a Bugembe as a father. Hey. But I'm just saying that because, okay, I think it was last year. No, actually, it was just a couple of months ago. I listened to Yuval Harari, famous author, from Israel, opening the ceremony at, I think it was the World Economic Forum, something like that. And he talked about, the advancement and progress of automation, and then the fact that we will have quote unquote a useless class. Ooh, that was brutal.
You have a what class?
The useless class, I think he called it. These are not my words, guys. I'm just saying. I'm just quoting this gentleman. So I don't know, but I'm just thinking, okay, not everyone has a Bugembe, and not everyone's share the same beliefs, right? Or maybe some people don't have the same opportunities. We're also different, and in our societies we have different cases and different communities and all that stuff. So what would happen to these people? Is it who are at stake, and is it the work of a government to make sure that they address the digital gap, or making sure all communities are included in that journey? Or and I understand it's a tricky question, and I'm not expecting you to have the answers, but I think it's important to be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree. Look, the cost of being left behind is huge. We have seen the disparities in society just because of this pandemic, right? So, all schools going online. What happened if you didn't have a computer? There were kids who were, using their mom's phone or their dad's phone to do their schoolwork, and so that immediately highlighted the disparities we have in society, and that gap actually increases. So technology does have the ability to bridge it. It has to be intentional, and are all governments, looking to do that? I'm not sure. Bearing in mind that the continent, the lovely continent that I come from, has governments that have been in place for 30 years, right? So the spirit of learning perhaps not as strong as it could be, and there is a risk of being left behind. So I don't have the answer yet, but there is clearly a gap that needs to be fixed.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's Hey, listen. Yeah. It's such a challenge, and that requires thoughtful thinking. It's just many dynamics and variables in that scenario, and but I guess it's good to be aware of that issue and challenge, I guess, present in societies, I think.
Yeah. Good.
Are you still doing the TED Talk?
I would. I'm gonna check with them and see if it's still happening. I would love to, because is there ever a time for us to continue to talking about that particular subject? Yes, absolutely. And so if you want me to share for the listeners, the TED Talk was primarily to talk about the biases that exist in society that are creeping into our algorithms today. And then therefore, if you juxtapose that with the increasing use of algorithms today that are perpetuating these biases, we're in real trouble, because what the computer doesn't have is the human emotion to try and discern that perhaps that decision, that automated decision, may be incorrect, right? When computer says no, it says no. It doesn't say maybe. It doesn't take into consideration other factors outside of its data training set. So we're in. It's difficult. It's really, really difficult. So it's a subject that I believe we do need to continue to talk about. Algorithms that are used in hiring are, biased against gender, biased against race. Algorithms that are used by the police, for facial recognition, for example, or things like that, carry on the same idioms of "we all look alike," right? So just by being another black person, it matches me, more likely to match me in a database than with others. And these aren't new problems. I think the reason for the TED Talk was because they're perpetuated. They're still there. These are problems that people discovered in 2014, 2013. And books have been written about this. And if books have been written about those in 2013 and 2014, about the biases that exist in these algorithms, even the biases that exist in Google, how come when my son writes "cute baby" in Google, because he's doing a presentation on new interview, does Google still only serve him what it believes to be a cute baby, and none of them look like him? So it's still a problem, and therefore we still need to spotlight the issue, and that's why I wanted to continue to talk about it. It's a conversation that needs to be continued to be had. I think one of the things that I'm derailing a little bit here is something that I said that triggered that. The value of conversation is so understated, I think, and you can see it so much in, power struggles where you have perhaps a narcissistic leader, who won't engage in conversation. And if you don't engage in conversation, how do you solve things? Conversation is so important to society,
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it's an art, just like comedy. And sometimes I feel like we've lost it, but hey, it's never too late. And it's important to continue the dialogue with broad perspectives as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And but yeah, that sounds like a great topic for next time. Your book, and hopefully more decidable stories, and your TED Talk. And before we wrap up, Mike, I have a last question. I always ask my guests to be ready. Are you ready?
Well, I'm as ready as I can be, having just been told that you have this.
Just kidding. No, just playing with your emotion here. So, what are the skills you would say, or character traits that help you so far in your life?
Okay, I have a couple that I think I can. I don't know how I developed a thirst for knowledge and understanding the way things work. I don't know where that came from, but it's something that I think has been really useful for me personally, right? That thirst for learning and continuous learning, by the way, the man always expanding. And the other one is there's a real practitioner side to everything that I do. So how do we make something useful? How do we, as it really useful? So a great question someone asked me the other day. They said, "Oh, I did trigonometry. I had to help my daughter do trigonometry the other day, and I've never used it in life. Why on earth are we using it?" And I was like, "But I've used it, right?" And they're like, "Oh, really? Were you measuring the angle of something?" And I was like, "No, actually, to find, if you consider that everything that we live in is sitting in some sort of vector space, right? A vector space being a mathematical representation of the world. The distance between the two is not only measured by how far they are, but also by what angle difference they have within them, And by doing that and getting a vector space measurement of those two vectors, you can understand how similar something is or not similar. So product recommendations, even people, people like me or people who don't look like me, that's a calculation in a vector space, which is very much a trigonometrical or very similar type calculation to work out the angles between two respective objects, And so being a practitioner of things, I think for me has been really useful, primarily because I have a real limitation in understanding theory when it's delivered the traditional way, right? And the only way that it sinks in my brain is if I say, okay, so let me take this here in this situation and use it there. You know what I mean? And then, so that's been quite useful for me in that, there's equations that are, I mentioned 300-year-old equations, by mathematicians from many, many years ago that can be used today to solve a lot of really clear problems that we have. So I think that's a trait that I value, in myself, but also in other people. Yeah.
Mike, it's been a great pleasure.
It's always a pleasure speaking to you, Yafa.
Same. Speak to you soon, my friend.
Okay, you take care.
All Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mind Narrative podcast. If you enjoy the content, we welcome your support by contributing on Patreon. Find out more at mindnarrative.co.uk. Bye.